This is Heartrepreneur Radio, maximizing your personal and business results by leading with your heart. With your host, Terri Levine. Listen every week as Terri tackles the topics that will help you become a successful heart-centered entrepreneur. Be sure to read the blog posts at www.heartrepreneur.com/blog. Come back often and add this show to your favorite RSS feed or subscribe in iTunes. You can also follow Terri on Twitter at MentorTerri and on Facebook.com/Heartrepreneur Terri Levine. And now here's Terri.
Hello and welcome to Heartrepreneur Radio and TV show with Terri Levine. I'm your co-host, Velma Gallant, and I'm super excited to be here with you today. You can connect with Terri, me, and other like-minded heart-based business owners in the Heartrepreneurs with Terri Levine Facebook group, so go check it out. And if you like this show and our shows, please be sure to hit that thumbs up, and we always love the 5-star reviews. Today's quote: remain focused on fulfilling your business mission. Never allow adversity to divert your attention and efforts. Richard Branson. And today's show topic is podcasting for mission-driven businesses. So I think that quote fits perfectly. Our special guest today is Ben Krueger. Ben is the Podcast Educator and founder of Cashflow Podcasting, where they help industry leaders reach more people, change more lives, and move entire industries forward with strategic podcasting services. Having collaborated on hundreds of podcasts since 2012, Ben's specialty is educating entrepreneurs and leaders about what's truly working in podcasting and the key strategies that make all the difference between incredibly successful shows and ones that never take off. His goal is to share as much as possible to help people understand if podcasting is the right move for them and their business, and how to craft, refine, and grow a world-class podcast. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you for having me on, Velma. Excited to be here.
It's kind of neat to have a podcasting expert on a podcast.
It can get a bit meta. And, especially what's really nice about it, though, is a lot of the things that I will talk about, then I can talk to the host about how that is applying for them. And so we can do a little bit of live kind of role play of where podcast hosts are using podcasting in their business, seeing their experience as well. So it's not just, somebody up on a podium talking theoretical. You can talk a little bit boots on the ground with the actual podcast host and how they're using it in their business, which is nice.
So I actually finished my podcast when you started your business. And, quite honestly, I did it just for the fun of it. And I think that there's a lot more strategy that can go into podcasting than necessarily what I did back then. I loved the information. I loved connecting with the people. And especially at that time, if I could have found a way to monetize what I was doing, I'd have kept doing it. But I made a different choice to pay closer attention to my family, which was a really wise choice for me. But I want to talk, total winner. Yeah. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how we can use podcasts strategically.
Yeah, absolutely. And the baseline, when it comes down to it, we see a lot of people talking about how people should be podcasting, and that kind of drives me nuts. I feel like podcasting, just like any other marketing channel, just like any other medium, it has its strengths, it has its weaknesses, and if you use it in a way that it's already naturally adept at, then it kind of makes it easier. You're rolling a snowball down a hill as opposed to trying to shove it up. So what we find fundamentally, folks that go into podcasting with the idea of, I'm going to start a podcast and then I'm going to monetize it, that's a rough road. That's a challenging path. Whereas what we have found is folks that have already started a business, they've built a little bit of a community, they've built a little bit of a track record with actually getting results for clients and being able to work with folks, whether that's, coaching courses, any really of those online community style of brands, personality brands, then podcasting can be that piece that fits in and becomes your ongoing content engine and your community building tool. So you're building trust with your listeners. You're essentially offering value and education so that folks can learn at their own speed, at their own pace. They get a sense of you. They get a sense of how you teach and how you approach your area, your topic. And you can weave in then how you help people go further, whether that's your products and services, whether that's your community, whatever it may be. And so you can kind of see where doing that, monetization becomes the podcast is a marketing channel for the business, for the brand, versus I have to start a podcast and grow it to a certain point where then sponsorships can actually make me some money. Because, you know, as someone who's podcasted in the past, you recognize probably more than most that podcast sponsorship is not a particularly lucrative avenue for most new podcasters, just from a numbers standpoint.
Absolutely. And I see, you know, again, it's a growing opportunity, definitely, is that as I look back, because podcasting was really quite new when I started. I started in 2007.
Yeah, very new back then.
So yeah. And so I ended up growing more from a perspective of guests. The growth in the guests was easy. That part came really easy for me. And, you know, I started having, you know, was booking, you know, 3-6 months out, which back then it was like, yay, that's something awesome to celebrate. But the business aspect that I was tying this to wasn't as well developed. So I think as I look back, I kind of had those strategies in a bit of a, not in the right order, that because I got so excited about the podcast, my focus shifted from building my actual business to growing the podcast. And that didn't necessarily impact my business the way it could have had I come from a different perspective.
Yep. And it's quite common. And as well, I think there's also a natural thing with podcasting where as a channel, it really resonates for some people like yourself. You love doing the interviews, you love the information piece. And so then tying that back in with the business, sometimes it's quite simple, but a lot of people miss that one piece that connects it back to the brand. And, you know, you mentioned kind of back in the early days of podcasting, having guests on was an incredible way to grow the show, and still can be, but it's not quite as effective just because a lot of people they see that more often. If they do a lot of podcast interviews, they're not going to promote it as much. So that's a little bit more of a challenging route to growth. Whereas, especially in kind of niche tight or defined audience groups, the way that we see a lot of shows growing now is a little bit more grassroots, where the podcast becomes something that is shared within communities from, you know, listener and member to other individuals who are a good fit for that community, a fit for that content. And so this kind of ties in then from a business standpoint as well, because the more, you know, everybody kind of talks about being specific with your audience and having a niche and all those things, but it ties in really nicely because then if you have a very specific audience group, like, you know, one of our clients does like financial advising for emergency room doctors, wildly specific. And then the podcast can become essentially the referral channel and the business card for that brand, because if one ER doc is listening to this podcast, finding it valuable, finding it helpful, maybe even using them as a service, and somebody's, you know, talking to him was kind of funny. He was saying, like, in between things, when they're just kind of hanging out, they're just chatting between emergencies, between things going on. they kind of, it's the water cooler talk. It's, oh, what have you been working on? What's going on? What's happening in your life? And this is where these kind of things can come up. And then growth happens more grassroots style for these types of shows versus, the types of the Joe Rogans and the mass audience shows. It's just a slightly different approach.
Well, and I think there's a lot of value in reminding people about that opportunity. I think because I think that's more of an opportunity than walking into it thinking you're going to be a Joe Rogan.
Exactly. Yeah. Or really any broad audience type host. Right. Like the opportunity now is very much in the, big fish in a small pond.
Right. Well, and it makes a lot of sense too, because one of the things that Terri teaches in her work is, stay in your lane, focus on one thing, have a very defined niche. And I think you're basically saying the same thing in the podcasting world, because that's going to give you more of an opportunity for your podcast to grow into the hands of the people who really want what you've got.
100%. Yeah. And so really it becomes a natural extension of the business, because if the business has a very clear audience, a very clear, like, these are the people we serve best, these are the people we can get the biggest results for and offer the most value to, then the podcast becomes an extension of that. And the content for the podcast becomes an extension of that, versus if the business hasn't defined clearly who their audience is, then it's kind of hard to have a podcast that has a clearly defined audience, because neither one do. And so then it's a little bit challenging to get traction and growth, because when someone comes across the show, it doesn't truly connect with them as like, this was made for me. Like this nails it on the head. Like another example, Katrina Ubal hosts the podcast Weight Loss for Busy Physicians. Wildly specific again. And you almost think sometimes like, could there even be enough people in that like check that box for it to be a thing? And it's just kind of the classic big fish in a small pond. The more you are the mayor of a small town versus, a citizen of New York City, the more you're able to build a community around that, build a strong brand that can actually get people some results, and have more heartfelt connection versus trying to make your solution fit to anyone who could possibly use it.
And that's where, again, I'm using myself as an example, is, so my content was all around personal growth. And so it would stretch from spirituality to financial to health. And so it was really a broad spectrum of information. And then I also had hour-long interviews. And I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, why did I do that? But at the same time, it was an amazing opportunity for me to expand in my growth and what I learned, and to connect to some really amazing individuals out there. I don't have regrets, but it's been a really great opportunity to look back and see, well, I did it this way. How would I do it differently? And one of them would be shortening the length of the podcast. Because I know I don't have time to sit there for an hour and listen to it.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other kind of formatting aspects would you recommend for somebody who's looking at it?
Yeah, I like this a lot. So one of the things, there's a few factors here. There's length, frequency, and there's really, at the end of the day, what goes into the episodes. Like what makes up an episode? Is it they're all interviews? Are they all solo teaching style? Are they, panel discussions? Or are they kind of a combo of those? And one thing that I see a lot of folks doing is kind of getting into the interview treadmill, where they bring in people for interviews, and they kind of relax into the interview treadmill without necessarily having a clear idea of this is our audience, this is the value we want to bring for our audience. So we're specifically bringing in interviews that support that message, that support that community. And I think part of the challenge with what I kind of call the interview treadmill as well is a lot of times you as the host or as kind of the leader of the community, you are kind of advocating your coaching and direction to outsiders consistently. Not that that's a bad thing, but there's a bit of a strategy piece where the more you are one who is coaching, guiding, advising, and supporting listeners as the host, as the personality behind the brand, or as the person who has the offering that's going to actually help them, the more you are pre-positioning yourself as their guide, as the person who can, help take them where they're trying to go. And so I'm not saying, that people shouldn't do interviews, but what I do think is important is during interviews, like we're doing here, you're sharing part of your own story. You're sharing some of your own experience and some of your own lessons learned. And so it's a discussion style interview versus bringing someone on, having, a checklist of questions that you're going to ask them, and then not having any interplay, not having any interaction there. And there's something to be said for more like case study, story-based content. Like if the people you bring on are essentially the type of person that your guest is, then you want to highlight them. You want to highlight their story, their journey, their transformation. So what I'm really getting at here is having a little bit of variety and a little bit of flexibility in the type of content that you are recording, so that if you're bringing on guests consistently, consider having an episode every once in a while where you just jump on and you are teaching a concept, like helping people understand something new, or weaving that into a discussion that you're having with someone. So the most powerful things that we have found, the kind of key elements that really draw people in and offer value. One is stories. That's nothing new. You've definitely heard that as stories. So teaching in stories, whether it's parables or actually telling about someone that you're working with, someone that your own history, your own experience, helping folks have a new insight or understanding. So it's not necessarily teaching like, oh, here's the thing, you're going to want to do step 1, step 2, step 3. It's more helping them shift their awareness. So I'm going to bring up Katrina Ubell again, because she does a really great job of this. Her whole show is about weight loss for busy physicians, but not in the sense of like, ooh, you got to hit the gym, you got to be dedicated, let's make, a New Year's resolution. It's more how to transform your relationship with your own body, with yourself, with food, with how you relate to your weight. And so one of her first episodes, she talks about essentially having people examine, and, her audience is women specifically, having women examine how have they treated themselves around food, around their weight, around those types of subjects. So like right off the bat, she's guiding people into a new insight for themselves. And so when you're that person who's helping folks in the audience have new insights, new understandings, as opposed to new tactical advice, that's a much deeper connection, and that's a much stronger shift for folks. So, if you're putting out sample trays at the grocery store, you're going to want to put out something that's pretty tasty, not the stuff that didn't sell very well. So that's the idea. And there's, I could talk on this all day, but I think that's a good starting point.
So what I'm hearing is again, like I'll tie it back to some of the stuff that Terri teaches is that you want your material to be a contribution. So you want to be giving, and you also want to be educating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so what I'm hearing is that this person is educating these women in this specific occupation. And I would hazard a guess that it is because she gets the impact that their occupation has on their relationship with themselves and the relationships with their bodies.
Yeah. Wouldn't you know it? She was a physician herself who struggled with her weight for a long time and, was able to create this transformation in her own life over time, and knowing the challenges that come with it, the setbacks, the, feeling like you're having to start over, the fact that her mentality and her maybe image of herself was a major part of this transition. And so then being able to relate that to others and help guide others in a way that supports them, total win.
So what I'm hearing is again, with it being part of a marketing strategy rather than the business, right? So it's a marketing strategy for the business, that it's important to make sure that the content is relevant, educational, a contribution, and that it's effective in this avenue, right? So I think you're getting what I'm trying to say here.
100%. Yeah. You can't paint with a broad stroke and just kind of regurgitate what the, general talk about a subject is. Like, there has to be some meat to it where you're actually helping people make some advancements, some progress for themselves, because that then is the proof in the pudding. That's the social proof. That's the connection where folks have the assumption of, well, if they helped me make progress with their free content, with the community, with the podcast, then what they offer must be the piece that's going to help me go further. And so, this is also why I feel, and the way that we've seen this work out a lot is when folks start with podcasting before having a clear idea of who their audience is or what their offer is or how they actually work with folks, they historically a lot of times don't have a solution nailed down enough to be able to offer that education or insight piece in a way that actually helps people make progress before they're ready to work together, because they're still figuring it out themselves.
Right. And I can see very clearly that that's what I did in my first podcast, because really it was all about me. and and I'm being kind of frank about that, because I loved it. I loved, and I put a lot of work into it. I could make it sound really good, because I would take the materials from these individuals and I would spend all week going through those materials, flagging this, flagging that. The conversation was really organic and beautiful, and it was focused on their content. Like, I loved it and I learned a lot. And the person on the other side of the microphone felt really good about their material. So, it's not like what I did had no value. There was value to it, but it was not strategic. There was no real direction to it. I was just randomly grabbing these amazing people and interviewing them.
Yeah. And, to that end, it sounds like it worked brilliantly. You got to meet a bunch of people. You got to have some amazing conversations. And I imagine some of those connections have definitely spurred into other things over time. That's always a piece of podcasting and networking from, it doesn't necessarily need to be podcasting, but I think this is where we see kind of the delineation between podcasting for podcasting and podcasting as a marketing channel for a brand. And one thing that I like to point out is just because podcast is used as a marketing channel for a brand doesn't mean that it needs to be salesy. It should not be salesy. So that's one thing that people oftentimes kind of bring up as a concern here is, well, if it's for my company, what if it's salesy? Or if it's for our audience, what if it's salesy? And really, it's just a little bit of a strategy shift and a focus on, I like to think of it as what's in my audience's best interest. And so that shifts the focus from you as the interviewer, or even the focus on the guest, to the audience, what's in their best interest.
I really like that. I really like that. I think that's a very important distinction. And I just noticed how far we've gotten into this amazing conversation, and I have not given an opportunity for our listeners to be able to connect to you. So I would love it if you would share how our listeners can best connect with you.
Yeah. Cashflowpodcasting.com is our brand. We're a podcast production and launch service. And our specialty is working with folks on the strategy piece, not just the implementation. And so the whole idea is somebody can show up with, an idea for a podcast and what their brand is, and we'll help them think through whether podcasting even makes sense for them as the right channel. And if so, really coach and guide the process to bring it out. So that's where all of our best content is. We have a free ebook there, Podcast Strategies, that really gives away all of our best stuff for free because, we like to work with folks that want it done for them. And if someone has the time, has the mental space and capacity to implement themselves, beautiful. We're thrilled about that too.
Awesome. Okay. So where we left off was how important the listener of the podcast is in your strategy. Because you talk about mission-driven businesses. So if you're doing podcasting, it's to enhance your mission, and your mission has to do with your clients and the end results that you're looking for them. So I think it's so important to keep the listener as your primary focus.
Yeah. And this is where you can kind of see where this all lines up. Like if you aren't actually a mission-driven business, then trying to play the mission-driven podcast angle is going to be a tough sell. Like you're not fooling anybody. And so there's an element of authenticity here where podcasting is pretty transparent. And it's very easy for people to get a deeper sense of you, the brand, what you're all about. And so, this is where truly kind of mission driven and industry driven podcasts thrive, because people connect with that kind of drive and that interest and that excitement. So like Michael Kitz's, he's a huge educator in the financial advisory space. And his podcasts are very essentially each episode, he highlights a new financial advisor who broke out on their own, built their own practice, built their own firm. And they're 1.5 hour long episodes, and sometimes they're painfully long, but for whatever reason, that really clicks with his audience. And so him being that person who wants to be, I like to think of it as he wants to be an advocate for people in his audience, for people in their entire industry, whether they become customers and clients of his or not. That's the approach that we see like truly working, not, I need to bring in more sales next month. Let's launch a podcast and try to kick up a community.
Mm-hmm.
This is a long-term content engine strategy. And so one of the filters that I use when we talk to new folks about their podcast ideas is I ask, hey, do you see yourself excitedly being a leader in this space 3 to 5 years from now? And if the answer is no, podcasting is probably not the right fit. And that's not that, you can't make it work. And that's not that, it wouldn't be, effective at all. It's more so, I like to think of where are the like slam dunk wins, and podcasting is one of those scenarios where if you see yourself in an industry long term, you are all about that space. You love learning about it. You love digging deeper. You love advocating for those folks. That's going to be like, the last puzzle piece in the puzzle that just kind of fits in really nicely. Versus, trying to use podcasting where maybe another channel is going to work better if you have either a shorter term approach, or, you want just a different kind of a strategy there.
Okay. There was a lot in there.
Yeah. Sorry. I just got going.
Well, but I think it's really important because, okay, where was I going with this? So for somebody might like me, where I would have kept doing what I was doing for 1,000 years, if it would have been a financially viable thing for me at that point. Podcasting, it's something that I get pretty excited about, right? Because it's that connection, it's the sharing of information. What I'm also hearing is that, again, doing it because it's something you're passionate about, not because you think it's a great marketing strategy.
Yes.
Right.
That's
like
a much better way to say it.
You want to choose a marketing strategy that makes sense, that you like, because, I'm not going to really be the kind of person who likes sending out postcards. Now, is it a viable marketing strategy for a lot of businesses? Absolutely. And, for some people, the creative idea of postcards gets them excited, right? So to them, it's something that's really valuable. Business cards, some people think that they're a valuable marketing strategy. I've thrown out stacks of them, right? So for me, that's not something that might be the best marketing strategy, but podcasting is something that I have a really good connection to. So it would be an appropriate marketing strategy for somebody like me.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is you want to make sure that if you're looking at podcasting, are you doing it because you think it's an excellent way to be able to share the information and make a difference for your clients? Or is it just, I've seen other people do it and this makes sense?
Yeah, totally. Because it's, again, it's one of those, like, if you're not excited about your industry and your business and kind of being an educator in that space, podcasting is not going to be a natural fit. And then you are competing out in that space with other people who are more natural fit for that channel. And that's a little bit of a challenge. Whereas, like you said, your natural communication style may be written. It may be, it may be an email newsletter. It may be whatever. And a lot of brands are mixing and matching and using multiple content channels here. But I think at the end of the day, it has to be something that you are fundamentally excited about. And it can't be that check mark thing that I have to do before the end of the week. It can't start out that way because, as with anything, we're going to be excited and then our enthusiasm is going to dip sometimes, and that's just human. Yeah. But it can't start out that way because that's where it becomes drudgery pretty quick, and that shines through in the content immediately.
There was one more thing that I wanted to point out, and I know we're getting really close to the end of our time, but one of the things that I heard was that one individual that has the 1.5 hour long podcasts, what I heard from that was that he really, really knew his audience. And that would be something that they would eat up. So for me, looking back at my hour-long interviews, they were amazing conversations and they had amazing content. But as I'm looking back, I know that, especially because my audience is going to be a lot like me, I can't sit there for half an hour. I want to get in, get my bite, get something I can take and move with. I like simplicity. So I would not create the same thing I created back then because my audience is different. Back then it was an audience of one.
Yeah. And so that's where a lot of this whole podcast strategy thing is. It's not boilerplate. It's not one size fits all because every audience is different. And the one consistent thing across the board is what's in my audience's best interest. And so that becomes a guiding question. So like just for a little insight, then when we're planning out a podcast, we start out with some good questions around, who the audience is, what their objectives and motivators are, what, as an audience, what are they trying to achieve? What do they want for themselves? And then, kind of bridging the gap for how can you actually help them as a host through the content, through, other things that you can do for them, whether that's products, services, whatever. And so we kind of lay out the underpinning educational, motivational pieces. And then from there, that's when we start thinking about, okay, how do we help the audience make that transition over time? How do we lay out a journey for them? And based on the audience, does that mean we have a weekly show, an every other week show, an hour and a half show? Do we do interviews? Do we do solo episodes? So kind of based on that, what's in my audience's best interest and what's going to help them make that transition? And so that's the classic, you can kind of follow a boilerplate or kind of a template approach, but you'll always find that it needs to be tailored to your specific audience.
Perfect. This was an amazing conversation. And I am 100% confident that we've offered some amazing content for our listeners that they can take and, make an educated decision. Is podcasting a great marketing strategy for me and my business? So I have loved this conversation. It's been just a fantastic, informative session. And I can see that we really put it to the wire for our time. So I want to make sure that our listeners, again, still have an opportunity to connect to you. Thank you, Ben. And if you can share your website, that would be amazing.
Perfect. Yeah. Cashflowpodcasting.com. And there we have a start here page with the book. We also have a quiz that walks people through, will podcasting work for my business? So it's 12 questions that helps you get a clear idea. And that's a great kind of starting point if you've been thinking about it for a while, but aren't really sold on the program, or, have wanted to for a while, but haven't been, ready to pull the trigger, because that's a big piece of it too.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you for joining us today at Heartrepreneur Radio and TV. And be sure to head on over to Heartrepreneurs with Terri Levine at Facebook. You're going to be able to connect with a lot more heart-based entrepreneurs just like you. And we look forward to seeing you again on our next show. Thanks.
You've been listening to Heartrepreneur Radio, maximizing your personal and business results by leading with your heart, with your host, Terri Levine. This show is produced every week for your enjoyment and education. To make sure you never miss a single show, add us to your favorite RSS feed or subscribe in iTunes. You can also read Terri's latest blog posts at www.heartrepreneur.com/blog, or follow Terri on Twitter at MentorTerri, and on Facebook.com/Heartrepreneur Terri Levine. Your questions and comments are always welcome and appreciated. Send them to Terri on either Facebook or Twitter. Thank you for listening.